I've never been much of a lawbreaker or a bad kid growing up, but there was something that my girlfriend and I would do that was probably the baddest thing that I ever did.
Hello, and welcome to the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, a weekly conversation with women who found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 74. If you'd like more information about the podcast, it's all at the website desertladydiaries.com. And I invite you to engage with the guests, the other listeners, or me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries, or on Twitter at Desert Lady Diary. Kit Brooks has lived most of her life in the desert, close to 40 years. She's a self-taught junk recycle artist, an actress, and writer. One of the greatest thrills of her artistic career was to meet, become friends with, and ultimately apprentice with Noah Purifoy. Now semi-retired, she lives with a variety of animals and creates. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's an honor to have you. What was your first experience with desert?
Okay. My family moved to the desert in 1962 or 3. I have a feeling it was actually 1962. Mm-hmm. We moved from Duarte, California. My father had done some business out in Barstow and kind of fell in love with the area. And he didn't like what was happening in the city. It was getting too busy, and he wanted to raise us children in a more rural environment. And we moved here. As a matter of fact, we stayed in a hotel on Park Boulevard that is now less than a quarter of a mile from where I live.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, the very first place that we lived, well, the house we bought was going through escrow.
Okay. Oh, my goodness. So about how old were you at that time?
I was 11 years old.
Okay, so you had to leave your school and all that stuff. Did you brothers and sisters?
At the time, I have 2 brothers and 2 sisters, but we're very spread out, and there was only one still living at home with me, my older sister, 3 years older than me. All the others were gone. One was in the service, one was married, and one was off somewhere, who knows.
Do you remember at all how that change was for you, coming from Duarte and having school friends and neighborhood friends and then moving to the desert?
Well, it was a bit of a culture shock, of course, because we lived in a little cul-de-sac neighborhood, and we hung out and played ball with the kids and had pool parties at the neighbors' houses and stuff like that. And it was a culture shock, but we just immediately adapted and totally fell in love with it. And we always had animals. We always had things to do, animals to take care of, horses to ride.
How much property did your family end up having at the start?
I think it was around 3 acres. It was on a hillside with some rocks in Paradise Valley.
So you had animals. We have a photo of you on the horse that will show on the blog post. So if you want to see Kid at about, I don't know, what are you, 12, 13 there?
Roundabout, yeah.
It's a great photo.
Thank you.
So was that your horse?
Yes, that was my hand-me-down quarter horse Buddy. Being the youngest in the family, everything, clothes included, and animals were all hand-me-down. After my sister had worn the horse out or wanted a more spirited animal, I got the older horse, and Buddy lived to be about 20 years old.
Wow, that seems old for a horse.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Oh, good for him.
But I rode him all over, just like you see in this picture, barefoot and brown, and without a saddle. I never owned a saddle.
What was this whole area, the Morongo Valley, or the Morongo Basin, rather, like when you came here in the 60s? I
joke that if you sneezed as you drove through Yucca Valley, you missed the whole town. It was that small. What is now called Old Town, Yucca Valley, that was the town. There was nothing past a Woman Springs Road. And all that's new. And we had one grocery store and the Star Market. But we had a lot of the necessities. We had shoe stores and clothing stores, dress shops and that kind of thing.
Did you go into 29 Palms much when you were growing up?
Well, I had to go to high school. I went to school in 29 Palms. I actually went to elementary school both in Joshua Tree and in Yucca Valley because we moved a couple times. And then middle school in Yucca Valley. And then we had to be bused into 29 Palms for high school for my freshman, sophomore, and senior year.
Okay.
And then the year that I graduated, the 68-69 school year, Yucca Valley got a high school. And I am a member of the very first graduating class of Yucca Valley High.
Oh, that's neat. My mom has a similar designation. She was the first full class to go through the new high school. So she started as a freshman in
Here in?
No, not in
Oh,
Yucca Valley,
no.
in her Bridgewater, New Jersey.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess it started to get more populated, so they
Right.
decided they needed to add the high
A
school.
high school, right.
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 Well, we were talking earlier, you told me that you were also involved in some theater here, and I was surprised to learn that what is now known to everyone as the High Desert Cultural Center was started in what is we know today as the Sportsman Club.
That's right.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I was actually in as many productions as I could be in school, both in elementary school, we had a few, in middle school, we had a few productions, and then high school. And a friend of my mother's told me that the local theater group, which was called the Joshua Tree Playhouse, was looking for a teenage girl for a melodrama they were doing. And I tried out and got the part. And I did several productions with them after that. And it was the very first production was at the Sportsman's Park, and it was a cabaret dinner theater at that time, which a lot of people don't know. If you look
Yeah.
back in the archives, you can probably see the pictures and get some of that
Right.
story.
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to do that yet, so I understand it's on the highdesertculturalcenter.com website that there's a tab there for either history or archives, and they do apparently have a whole history of it back to probably that time. I haven't had an opportunity to look,
See,
though.
it was 66 was the first play that I was in there. They also, I don't know if they still have them, but they used to have scrapbooks. We were in, and of course, if there was a production going on, when there was a parade at Grubstake Days or something like that, we always had a float, and everyone that was in the play rode the float, that kind of thing. I was in a lot of the parades. We would walk our dogs in the parades and ride our horses. I was a little blonde Indian. Sometimes my sister dressed in fancy Western, and so we were in a lot of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I understand they had a lot more of that in 29 Palms many years ago. There were more and bigger parades and celebrations.
Well, each town had their own parade. Yucca Valley had Grubstake Days, Joshua Tree had Turtle Days, and 29 has Pioneer Days.
And did you participate in all of those? Or did most people that were here?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, it was cheap entertainment, and
Right.
it was the only thing going on, you know. There wasn't a lot of entertainment for kids in those days, and so that was a really fun thing. It was a family thing. It was
Right.
very wholesome and so on.
And growing up then, did you spend much time in what was then the monument?
Oh, my heavens, yes. That's sacred ground as far as I'm concerned. I have a cute story that you might enjoy.
Yeah.
I've never been much of a lawbreaker or a bad kid growing up, but there was something that my girlfriend and I would do that was probably the baddest thing that I ever did. And, and that was we would each tell our parents that we were going to spend the night at the other one's house, and then we would drive. My girlfriend had a car, and we would drive up into the park and camp out.
Overnight?
Spend the night. Yes, it was
Illegal
just
camping.
very, very decadent. Yeah, exactly. And it was actually called the Joshua Tree Monument at that time.
Right.
I can't remember when it became national park, but
I want to say it was sometime in the 90s or late
Probably.
90s, I
Yeah.
feel like is when it was. But there are so many old timers here that do still refer to it as the
park.
national park. And I think that that's something that just happens
or
when...
the monument.
Right,
It was
the
called the
monument,
monument.
right.
Yeah.
That just happens when you are in a place where something has already been created. It's hard to go back and take on the new name, so to speak, of it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. You've been here a really long time. Talk about the waves of increase of population, say, that you've seen come here, and maybe where have they happened, if you can remember the years, and why? Was there something you think that spurred them to happen, and then why it doesn't happen again for a while?
I think there was a mentality like when we left Duarte of people getting tired of that kind of an environment and wanting to, and not, it's not for everybody.
No.
You know, there are people who have come here and just been absolutely horrified and couldn't wait to leave. And then there's those that just totally fall in love with it and don't ever want to leave.
Right.
And I think the increase in crime and that kind of thing is a big reason that a lot of people move out here. It's also a much cheaper place to live than a lot of other places, and I think that draws a lot of people. So, and I've seen it come and go. There was a time when you didn't have to lock your doors, and we didn't. You could leave your house open, and of course that time is long since gone.
Right, yeah.
Long since gone. With the population, people bring their problems and their drug use and crime and all that kind of thing, which is sad, but they call that progress.
Right. Right. When you were graduating high school, were there ever any thoughts of leaving the desert and going off and striking out on your own somewhere else, or did you actually do it?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. I actually left shortly after, I think it was about a month after I graduated from high school, and I wound up getting married and having a baby, and my now ex-husband happened to be a Luiseño Indian who had property on the Pechanga Indian Reservation, and we lived 2 years in Tujunga, which was his hometown, and then we moved out to the Indian Reservation, and that was quite an adventure. My husband built an 8 by 16 plywood house in the driveway of our home in Tujunga. We loaded it on a truck, took it out to the reservation. It was 2x4s and plywood with holes drilled through them, and you butted the 2x4s together and ran a bolt through it. And we literally dropped it on the property, set it up, and spent the first night in it.
Oh my goodness.
And we lived for 2 years on that reservation with no electricity and no running water.
Wow.
And we built a round rock house, which I unfortunately never got to live in. I decided to end my marriage and leave my husband, and I spent 13 years in Temecula. And then I had become a volunteer firefighter in Temecula, and as a result of that, I went through the EMT course, and I became an emergency medical technician, and I decided to move. I actually met a fellow at an auto extrication class in Corona, and he was a fireman at the 29 Palms Marine Base. And we started dating, and he talked me into moving back out here. And I actually had put an application in at the Marine Corps fire station and didn't get my paperwork in time, and so I didn't get the job. And so here I was, an EMT, and I got a job at Joshua Tree Ambulance as an ambulance driver, and I did that for several years.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Can we go back to the living on the reservation for a little bit?
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm sure there are a number of people who have never had that experience. What was that like?
It was amazing. I was 20 and 21. I got married at 17, and I was 21, and it was very exciting. I didn't mind. People live like that for hundreds, thousands of years, and they survived. And it actually was a very enriching experience, I think. Every now and then, I will walk over to a light switch and flip it on, and I'll go, God, that's so cool. I just love being, we had a generator, and we had a little propane stove. We had a propane refrigerator, propane stove, a portable toilet, which we took turns going out and digging the hole and emptying.
Oh, my goodness.
And when I wanted to take a bath, I would go out to a 55-gallon drum, and I would take a 5-gallon metal bucket, dip it in, bring a whole bucket of water up, bring it in, put it on the propane stove, heat that water, and then put it in a galvanized tub, and that's how we took our bath.
And this was, the early 70s?
Yeah.
And being on the reservation, Were you exposed to a lot of Native American culture,
Oh,
some
absolutely.
ceremonies and things like that? What was that like?
Well, my husband, although he didn't have dark skin and dark hair. He was more lighter skinned, but he had enough blood to have the land. So he was accepted by the tribe. As a matter of fact, the spokesman of the tribe was his cousin. And I, being his wife, was accepted very well by the tribe. I played on the baseball team and helped out where it was necessary.
Right.
But, yeah, it was. I think I'd always loved the Indian culture, and I really fell in love with it living there.
So you come back here and you're working for Joshua Tree Ambulance. When did your recycling art start to happen?
Well, I pretty much have been creative most of my life, but I never considered myself an artist. When I was a kid growing up, I used to make mobiles and something I called hangy down things. And that was mobiles, and I would use driftwood and shells and anything that I could find, and that was really the beginning of my recycled art. What I love about recycled art, number one, the textures and the three-dimensionality of it, but the materials, 99% of them are free. You walk out in the desert. Matter of fact, I started a genre, I guess you could say, using water heater skins, the outside covering of a water heater.
Right.
I was out scrounging around looking for materials one day, and I came upon a water heater. It had been sitting out so long that it had kind of burst open. The skin kind of came off of it, and I was looking for metal. I used to take tin snips and cut. I made wreaths with Joshua trees and coyotes and desert things on them, and I needed metal, and I originally started cutting, and that material was thin enough that I could cut it. I eventually got a plasma cutter, so now I cut everything with a plasma cutter.
When you started doing this, is that the time that you met Noah Purifoy, or was that after?
It was after that. Like I said, I've been creative, but because I didn't draw and paint, I didn't think that I was really an artist. And when I came back to the desert, I started meeting people that were doing performance art, and I started seeing earth art and recycled materials. And I started doing that kind of work. It just intrigued me. And at the time, I was working for a medical supply company in Palm Springs. I was living in Joshua Tree, but working in Palm Springs. And the house that is directly across the street from Noah's property, which ultimately the Noah Purifoy Foundation purchased and he lived in until he died. There was a gentleman living in that house who required oxygen. And because I lived up here, I got all the deliveries up in the high desert. And I'll never forget, I came around the corner to that street and my mouth just dropped open. My impression was Disneyland on acid. And at the time, I was dating a fellow who was in the process of opening up a little gallery in downtown Joshua Tree. It was very short-lived, called the Sun Gallery. And I just totally fell in love with the place, but I delivered my oxygen, then I came home, and I told this fellow about this place, and he says, "Oh yeah, that's Noah Purifoy. I know him. He's going to be putting some stuff in my gallery. Do you want to meet him?" And I said, "Oh my God, yes!" So he took me out there. He arranged it, and we went out. And Noah and I just hit it off like you wouldn't believe. We became very good friends. I would go out and visit him, and he was the most amazing man. He was very humble, and I couldn't believe how humble he was. As a matter of fact, I didn't realize how famous he was. He never bragged about, he would mention things, but he never did it in a bragging way. And so for the longest time, I didn't really know how famous he was. And that hit home really in a powerful way on two different occasions. I was visiting with him one day, sitting in his front room, and he always would get phone calls, and he answered the phone, and he gave directions to the house, and people would call him and, try to find a way out there. And this couple comes, and they have this coffee table book that's written in German, and his work was featured in it. And they actually came to the United States specifically to look him up and find his property and look at his place. And
Wow.
I was just flabbergasted. And then another time, he had a show at the Getty, the old Getty, and was getting quite elderly at that time, and he asked me if I would drive him. And I did. And we went to the show, and I mean, it was a pretty big deal having a piece at the Getty.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we went to a house in Los Angeles, which is still there, that his ex-partner runs, called Terrace Hall. And it was actually a house that they turned into a gallery, and all of his work was in there. And so we walked up to the door, and Noah was standing over to my left, and the door opened to where they couldn't see him. And the woman says, "Oh, hello there. Welcome. Please come in." And then she opened the door a little further, and she saw Noah, and she goes, Noah, you're here. And she ushers him in and takes him off. And there was a film crew that was doing a documentary on him. So I was wandering around the gallery, and there was a second story, and I was up there, and people were pushing past me going, he's here. That's when I realized how famous he was.
Right. Meanwhile, you're just kicking it in his living room.
Exactly.
Joshua Tree.
Exactly.
That's amazing. What a great experience.
Yeah. And then at some point, many years after that, towards the end of his life, he became a little more frail and wasn't able to do certain things. And so, and he always taught people. You could sit in his front room and you would learn something. I always felt like I'd gone to school when I would visit him.
Yeah.
And so I became a student of his, and I helped him. And there are several pieces on the property right now that I did under his direction, kind of like Dale Chihuly directs people to do his work, but it's his vision. I built the shopping cart, the big...
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I did all the welding on the shopping cart. I did all the soldering on the doors of the Quonset hut. And there's about 3 pieces. Myself and another young man named Bahe Tintari were apprenticing with him at the same time, and we worked on those pieces together.
Where was he from? How did he
He was, from what I understand, he was a graffiti artist from Los Angeles, and his mother lived in the desert, and he'd known about Noah, so we looked him up and became a student of his as well.
Did you know Kathy Allen?
Of course.
When she was there?
Of course. Yeah. Well, she and I did not work together at the same time.
Okay.
She was a little before me, and I was towards the end of his life. And actually, I'm the one that finally got Huell Hauser to come out and do the show, and I'm in that, by the way.
Oh, cool.
I was actually working for Huell cleaning his house in 29 Palms, and I also caretook an adobe that he owned, that he was going to turn into an art center, but that didn't happen. And I mentioned to him, he was doing the California Gold Series, and I said, "Oh gosh, have you heard of Noah?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, he's on my list." And I made eye contact with him, and I said, "Look, Huell, he's getting really old. He's getting frail. You better do it now. If you want to do it now." And so he did. He put him higher up on the list, and he got it done.
I'll have to go. I bet it's out on YouTube or something.
I have copies of it. I'll be happy to lend it to you.
Yeah, I'd love to see it.
It's VHS. Yes.
Oh.
I don't have. I need to get a digital.
Probably
copy
at the
of
thrift store we could come up with something.
Exactly. Or turn it into a DVD.
Turn it into a DVD. Exactly.
Yeah, I don't have that equipment.
Yeah,
but.
no, me either. But I'm sure there's somebody up here who does.
Yeah. Exactly.
Wow, that's awesome.
Thank you.
What keeps you here?
I just love the desert. It is getting a little busy for me. I live right off of Park Boulevard, and I'm not real happy with the influx of, during the shutdown, what's happened in the park is just so disheartening to me. But I bought a house, and I love to garden, and I love the people here. I have a network of several different types of groups of people that don't intermingle back and forth. My spiritual group and my art group and so on and so forth. And the people here are really wonderful. And I love the weather. And I own my house, bought and paid for. It took me 5 years to pay it off.
There are so many people that would love to be in that situation.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons it keeps me here. And not the money to move anywhere else, but I do love it here.
Yeah.
I love everything about it.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you coming and talking with us today.
Thank you so much. It was
It's been
fun.
wonderful.
Thank
yeah, so many great stories and insights. I really appreciate
we
it.
could do 2 or 3 podcasts
I'm
with
sure
this
we
stuff.
could. I haven't started having repeat guests yet, but I will put you on the list.
Thank you.
And for those of you who are Patreon supporters, thank you very much for doing that. I'm going to have Kit select 4 numbers randomly between 1 and 50. And we're going to answer those questions.
Okay.
So I'll take, let me get something to write it down because I'll forget the numbers.
Okay.
Okay. So,
Okay. How about number 3 to begin with?
And 3 more.
Okay. Number 50, 17, 12.
And 12. Okay, so the questions that I'm going to ask Kit to answer and will be available to you exclusively as a Patreon supporter, where you can go to patreon.com/desertladydiaries, and for $5 a month, you can support the podcast and get this exclusive content. So the first one is going to be, what's your favorite driving or road trip music? And then we're going to go to, what was the first paying job you ever had and where was it? And then we're going to talk about, you're stranded on a desert island. What are 3 items that you absolutely need? And the last one will be your top 3 favorite pizza toppings. So if you want to hear Kit's responses to those questions, go on over to Patreon and we'll see you there. Thanks.
I really loved Kit's story about how she met Noah Purifoy, and I went out online and I found the interview that Huell-Hauser did that Kit talked about during our conversation. If you want to view it, it's about 25 minutes. You'll find the link in the blog post about this episode. So go to desertladydiaries.com, click on blog, and you'll find the link in there. And if you'd like to hear the answers to the questions Kit chose for Diary Unlocked, the episode is available over at the Desert Lady Diaries private podcast on Patreon. Diary Unlocked is available exclusively to Patreon supporters for $5 a month. Check it out at patreon.com/desertladydiaries or check out the details on the support page of desertladydiaries.com. Once you become a supporter, you'll receive a personal link to the private podcast feed where you'll be able to find that exclusive content. And speaking of Patreon, as we move into shout-out time, first shout-out is to the Sites family of Wonder Valley. Thank you so much for being the first Patreon supporters of the podcast. I hope you're enjoying the Diary Unlocked content. And another shout-out to Kimberly. Thank you so much for your support of the podcast, friend. I really appreciate it. And if you don't subscribe to the podcast via a traditional podcasting channel, you can always sign up for the weekly newsletter that'll come to your inbox with the new episode every week. Go to the website, desertladydiaries.com, and click on Weekly Newsletter, or just send an email to me at desertladydiaries@gmail.com and put Newsletter in the subject. I hope you'll join me next week for another episode of Desert Lady Diaries. Thanks so much for listening.